Alright, hello Professor Cromwell. It's me, Diamond, coming to you live from my kitchen table, and I am ready to present my presentation on Myne on Ground. I have decided to choose option number 2, which is a social perspective. And as my topic, my broad thesis is that without the right to achieve the necessary conditions of liberty to know one's own ground, freedom becomes a hollow concept. I think this is the correct term for my broad thesis because throughout the book it talks about having the right of liberty and freedom and know your own ground, so to say, which is like your rights and what you're able to do and what you aren't supposed to do, so to say. Um, my video is a little bit longer than the average time for it because I did provide a lot of um, evidence and quotes, but I hope that doesn't get me disqualified for the full points. But my antithesis, American race relations from a social perspective is that property, a house, family, a last name, guns, and wealth made a difference on where you stood on the social scale. As you know, Anthony Johnson was the main character of Middle Ground, and then he came up from like a not good background. He was a former slave, and then he just made a pathway from other individuals, especially free blacks, to show them that they can become a famous planter, and that even though we live in a white world, so to say, black people are able to do things that whites are able to do. And Anthony Johnson stood at all odds against being successful black planter in what seemed to be an all-white world. Anthony Johnson was free, but others questioned where he stood on the social scale because he owned other blacks, and people thought of him like how he be black but own another black person. You aren't free, so to say, or you're just living up to their expectations, or they're just like controlling you or whatever. Um, my evidence is kind of long. I think I provided 16 quotes, so to say, so I'm just going to get started. My first quote is from page number 5. It says, "Freedom for such marginal figures was desperately insecure, and many probably did not regard it as a significant improvement over slavery. Property made the difference. The black peasants of mid-century Northampton owned sizable tracts of land, competed with white neighbors in the marketplace, built up impressive herds of livestock, and from time to time purchased dependent laborers." So, goes back to what I said. This quote shows how property again made a difference of where you stood, and how the free blacks competed with their white neighbors. My second quote is from page 6. It's from a straight out quote from Anthony whenever he was Anthony the Negro, before he got his name changed to Anthony Johnson. And he said, "I know mine own ground. Well, I know my own. He finds fault with me that I do not work, but now I know my own ground. And I will work when I please and pay when I please." I think Anthony is trying to say that he knows where he stands, he knows his right. He paid his way out to freedom, and so he now is a planter. He has a plantation, other blacks, and he now has control or power, so to say, and that he will work whenever he wants to work, and he knows whenever it's time to play or get things done. He knows when the time is to do that and when the time is to make money. My third quote is from page 6 as well. It says, "Property provided a livelihood as well as immunity from deprivation. It gave them identity before the law and security in times of trouble." So again, it just goes on to say how property made a difference, and how if you had property, you were high up on the scale. My other quote, my fourth quote, is from page 9. It says, "Anthony Johnson appeared as a servant, and while some historians argue that many early blacks were indentured servants rather than slaves, Anthony seemed to have been a slave like other unfree blacks in the 17th century Virginia. He possessed no surname. Had he been able to document his conversion to Christianity, preferably by providing evidence of baptism. He might have sued for freedom, but there is no record that he attempted to do so. He settled on Bennett's plantation, no doubt more concerned about surviving from day to day about his legal status. So just again, Anthony didn't care that he didn't have a last name at the time. He was trying to make a stand, make a difference, put his name on the market to say that, yeah, I may be black, but I'm capable to do as any other white person's able to do. And then my quote number 5, page 12, it says, the reduction of annual taxes obviously helped Johnson to reestablish himself, and the fact that he was a Negro and so described during the proceedings seems to have played no discernible part in the deliberations of the local justices. So this quote kind of states that even though Johnson was a Negro, he did prove that he had the right to be free and own local justice, like and plantation. And then page 18, quote 6, the Johnsons knew that they were different from their white neighbors. The exclusive monopoly of slave status for blacks, the ordinary presumption against blacks, testifying unless there were countervailing circumstances of a highly unusual nature, all underscored on a daily basis their continual deprivation, but within the circumscribed environment as the Johnson story vividly suggests possibilities for advancement existed in 1650 that by 1705 were only a memory. So Anthony Johnson did have a family, which wasn't common for free blacks or blacks back then, and this quote just states that everything that the Johnsons had in 1650 were only wished to be like in 1705, because as time gone on, things did get harder. Quote number 7 came from page 20. If whites and Negroes could share the same status of half freedom for 40 years in the 17th century, why could they not share full freedom in the 20th? So this goes back to how, like, even though what we think about slavery, that it's all bad. Some things were good. Some whites and blacks at the time were treated equally, and they got the same freedoms and same punishments. And we're just saying, this quote's basically saying, if this was like this then, why is it so different now? Because, as time changed, you should think things will get better. But as we see now in the news, everything is just based off politics and hatred, things like that. Quote 8 came from page 25. It said, a gun gave a man a sense of personal independence, a voice in local affairs that carried weight even when logic failed. So this just goes back to my antithesis about how a gun basically meant that you were higher on the scale and that you had a sense of belonging, so to say. And this quote says that whenever all fails, you still have that gun, so you still are higher. My 9th quote came from page 45. It said, a man's place in the chain was determined in part by wealth and in part by race. So this quote just completely is just complete evidence and correlates with everything I said in my antithesis about a man's place in the chains was determined by if you had money and what color you were. Quote number 10 came from page 47, and it said, without a large estate, a man, of course, cannot claim to be a great planter. Indeed, in Northampton, social status correlated closely with personal wealth. Local gentlemen usually built up their holdings through arduous work, hard bargaining, and sheer luck. A major factor in achieving economic success in the society was land, and some planters possessed a great deal of it. Again, let's go back to land. Like everything, majority of these quotes just goes back to saying, like, if you had land, if you had property, you had everything, because land equals money, and back then it wasn't still to say money was everything, like how money is everything now, which is crazy. But like, if you had money, you had a sense of belonging, so to say, like you were one up to your neighbor who was like poor. And this just said that everything, all the hard work you had and the money, it was through work, and success and luck, so to say. Quote 11 came from page 49, and it says whites, blacks, Indians, and all comers were fair game in the scramble of wealth. So it just goes back just to say that no matter what color you were or background, you were capable of being successful as your partner or the person sitting beside you, or so to say. And like now, the social scales just say like how blacks are so low and whites are so up high. Quote 12 came from page 69, and it says the free blacks of the Eastern Shore possess both money and given names. This fact is of great significance for the presence of black family names in Northampton records. It allows us to place individuals within specific kinship network. So this just is reassurance that how basically goes back to your lesson in class saying that talks about how it goes back to like even the sex slave like women like they would take away everything. If you don't have a last name, then who are you? You just have your first name, so you really don't have like a sense of belonging and like identity, so to say. But the free blacks, they were have a surname which was able to make them on the market of saying, hey, this is me, I'm capable of having property, I'm a person, I have freedom, and I can just be successful. Quote 13 came from page 71, and it says the unusual social environment of New Amsterdam shaped black aspirations and assumptions. So this quote is also reassurance about how the environment back then is what we wouldn't really think about, like what's not really taught in like elementary or high school history classrooms about the true history of slavery and about how blacks really did have a chance, and like the opportunities that they had was like inspiring because of the environment. Quote 14 came from page 104, and it said, if a man owned property, he was a member of the community. So this just goes back to how property is everything. If you had property, you were a citizen, so to say. Quote 15 came from page 112, and it says free Black Panthers recorded wills, accumulated property, and educated their offspring precisely because they believed their families would continue to play a significant role in the Northampton affairs. This quote was like one of my favorite quotes, and that actually provided a lot of evidence because back then you would think what was taught that blacks were educated, like they were able to read and write, which is true, but some of them they actually were, and the ones that were able to read and write, they want to pass that on to their offspring so their children can learn how to read and write and show that yes, we're black, but we're also educated as well as our white peers. And again, property is in there, so property does play a big role into who you were. And my last quote, quote 16, comes from page 113, and it says Northampton's free blacks competed for the same resources, primarily land and labor, participated in the same markets, and raised the same crops as did the great planters. So this last quote I put because it just goes back to land, how land was basically the center of it all. If you had land, you had a sense of well-being. It goes back to say so the free blacks were able to compete with their neighbors just as the same resources as the great planters like Anthony Johnson. If he can do it, so can I. And to sum this up, what we can learn about ourselves and race relations in America, an American based on my presentation and what the future holds. What we can learn about ourselves and race relations in America based off of my presentation is that we can't let our color describe and designate where we're meant/should be on the social scale. Most blacks nowadays are settling for less and are comfortable with being at the bottom, known as low class, poverty level, or working class, when there's plenty of opportunities that can take us to be where we want to be. For example, many free blacks had something to prove to the majority white population that they were able to do the same things that they did. We shouldn't let the color of our skin be a barrier to get us to the next level of success in life. We're all given the same life, so why not live it to our full potential? Anthony Johnson knew he was different from his fellow black peers, and he didn't let that stop him from being a successful planter. He had to do what he had to do to survive the predominant white world that we live in. to make a pathway for his future generations. Anthony Johnson earned his freedom, and given all the evidence that I provided, he was surely was one of the few free, successful blacks in Virginia's Eastern Shore during the 17th century. Looking towards the future, we need to learn to judge less and love more and accept others who are different from us. We need to learn that change can be good and that we should stop classifying ourselves by how proud we are about how much money we have. So, closing this up, just because you may not be as rich as your peer, or you may not have like the car that they have, like you may not have the 2020 whatever car is out. I don't know, I drive a 2006. But moral of the story, be grateful for what you have, and that if you're envious or jealous, so to say, which is not a good characters to have, just go get it. Work hard for the things that you want in life. Don't just settle for less. Like Anthony Johnson, he was proven to be a free black. He had freedom. He had all the characteristics. The main characteristics, he had property. He earned the right to all things that he had for him and his family. He knew how to read, he knew how to write, he knew how to bargain. He didn't, so to say, turn his way back from the black culture. He just knew he had to make adjustments to what he had to do to survive for him and his family. So social class and social scale played a major role back then, and it really does play a major role that it does today. Again, I apologize for my video to be a little longer. I hope it doesn't get me points taken off. If it does, I understand. I just want to provide a good bit of evidence to support my antithesis of how property was the main resource of what played a role in the social scale, going back to liberty and knowing your own ground and your own worth and the rights that you had and still have today. That doesn't seem to be so true, so to say, based off the Declaration of Independence. But we can just take it one day at a time and just stand together. And I hope you and your family are well during this crisis, and maybe I'll see you around campus next year.